She's
Okay,
sick.
Jim and Dana are trying to get on.
Okay, I'll mark them.
Talked to them.
I'll mark them in as soon as
Yeah, I've talked to them, and so we've got a quorum. We can start. Okay, well, I'm going to call this to order, and then, Mr. Reyes, well, one more time, buddy. Thank you.
All right, please join me. We thank you for the many blessings you've freely given to each of us, and we ask for your presence to guide this meeting of the Rate Advisory Committee. Provide them with the knowledge, compassion, and the wise counsel needed as they discuss the business matters on the agenda today. Help us all to remember that we are stewards acting on behalf of our customers, and provide us with the grace to serve all people well. And we ask this in your name. Amen.
Thank you. Did you talk to Dana? I guess Dana still can't get in, so. Okay, let's go ahead and we've got a couple of folks on public input. I saw Dr. McGuire here. I saw Darby. I guess that's maybe, I don't know if they're speaking or not. I don't even see them now. Okay, whoever would like to speak first, just come on up. Well, you're sitting behind the pillar, Darby. I couldn't see you. Come on. Looking for you. There you go.
Thanks a lot. Well, I'm really glad that the committee is going to consider the rate decoupling issue. I've been reading about it for 10 years or so as being a very good way to increase efficiency and to reduce fossil fuel emissions by a utility at the same time maintaining the necessary revenue. And it's decoupling, meaning that you separate the sales from the revenues, so that you don't make money by selling fuel, you make money by serving your customers. And so it's just being done in most states now in some form or another. And it's something that I think, as a city should look into and study to see if it would work for us. It's complex to pull it off, but I think we can do it. I read some of the attorneys' PowerPoint about it. And one thing is you can design decoupling to protect the low-income residents. It is not necessary that they would be punished by having higher rates by doing decoupling. Also, you can do what's called decoupling plus, which actually rewards the utility for using less fuel. And therefore, the more efficiency you can promote, the more profit, so to speak, or excess money you can generate. So I didn't realize I would be up here right away, but I think that the objections that are the con parts that were set out by the attorney can be eliminated by the proper design of the system. And but I think it's a good summary what she has put together of how it works. So I hope that the committee will consider seriously doing a study on decoupling to see if it might work for San Antonio to eliminate our conflict of interest. At the one hand, we have public policy to reduce fossil fuel emissions, and on the other hand, we have the necessity to make enough sales to pay the city $400 million a year. So that's what decoupling can do for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Darby. Dr. McGuire?
Thank you. I'm Meredith McGuire, Dr. Meredith McGuire. I've seen several of you a number of times. I want to make this very quick. I don't have time to explain something that I've only just learned a little bit about. But anyhow, this is really important for you all to keep in mind because there are ways in this process that you can structure the rates in a way that will help the people who are struggling to pay their bills in the first place, and also then to try to find more ways of getting them the wherewithal to be able to reduce their usage. So, for example, I think one of the things that CPS needs to have happen is literally a blitz to create as much affordable housing with, for example, proper weatherization and so forth. And we really need to do that before we start putting these heavy rates into place. I think that you should also push hard to SAWS to justify the RCE rate structure, which is a residential rate, but basically creates a situation in which the people who are using the most energy in this city get a huge discount through this RCE rate, while then that gets spread out on all of the people who are paying only for a very small amount, and that's just not fair. It's not a fair way of using the rate structure. But it's not only the issue about it being fair, we're also talking about how can we get the things that the people need for their electricity. We need to have more ways of getting that to them. So please make an effort to include rewarding in matters of energy efficiency and finding a way that everyone in San Antonio ends up with energy efficiency. And I suggest, and this is not a formal thing, but really stop and think about it. If there are businesses or residences that are using huge amounts of energy, don't you think it would be appropriate to ask them to, as a requirement for getting good rates at CPS, sorry, I have to talk to SAWS as well. But anyhow, have them find a way that they can ask the heaviest users to co-invest in decentralized energy here in San Antonio, putting in solar arrays and battery storage. That would have made a big difference this past year when all of those limbs were coming down from the ice storm and so forth. So look for those kinds of measures. We could do it here in San Antonio, but we have to have the will to do it. And the thing that Darby just talked about might help make it possible and affordable. Thank you very much.
Sure. Oh, somebody got off with my agenda. I don't know. Maybe I get another one somewhere. There you go. Thank you. I got one. Okay, couple of opening remarks. Just to kind of tell you where we are and set the stage for where we're going. We're looking at affordability, and we're looking at the third step of rate making. So remember, the first step is what's the revenue requirement? The second step is how do you assign that revenue requirement among the class of trades by what those class of trades are costing us to serve. And as y'all know, you did receive today, or I guess 2 days ago, the latest rate study, cost of service study. Let me use the right term. You did receive the latest cost of service. So if you have any questions, talk to Chad and his group about that. But that is the second step, and that is a step that really will be coming into effect in the fall with the rate increase. What we're talking about is once the costs are allocated to a class, then how do we actually bill that class? Okay, and that's what we're doing. And of course, our focus is on affordability. Now, I don't use PowerPoints, but I do think I have one, and this is a pretty rare event if it ever comes up. If it doesn't, I can tell you about it. Affordability, and the way we're looking at this is three legs of a triangle, okay? You've got to have all three of them for affordability. The first leg is what we're talking about today, which is rate relief, whatever you want to call it. It's helping people that need help with their bill, okay, directly, with funds. The second leg is conservation, which we worked on at the STEP program. And we'll talk more about that leg next month. The third leg is demand management. How can people get the signals of cost in order to manage their use of power? The second leg is really how do you do what Dr. McGuire is talking about? How do you make the place you're using power and the utilities that you're using power with more efficient? The second one is how do you make a decision as to when you do use power? And as we all know, that peaking point that costs us so much because we have to leave, unlike the state of Texas, we have reserve capacity and we have to pay for that reserve capacity. So to the extent we can shave those peaks off by individual customers making good decisions about when they actually use power, then we're better off all around. So again, this month we're going to talk about rate relief. Next month we'll talk about conservation, and then that's, so this is March, April, and then in May we will talk about demand management. Okay, that's where we're going. And so the first person up is Ms. Harwick, and she's going to give us a little review on our customers.
Thank you very much, Reed. All right, so my name is Deanna Hardwick. I think I've had a chance to meet just about all of you. I'm the Executive Vice President for Customer Strategy. So today what I'm going to be talking about is our customer base. You know, I think a lot of times when we talk about our customers, specifically in this setting, and rightfully so, we refer to them as ratepayers. But there's so much more for us, right? They are our neighbors, friends, families. They're the businesses that we interact with on a regular basis. So that's really what I'm going to talk about. It's that our customer base is pretty big, and they are our ratepayers and so much more. So when you think about who our customers are, who our customer base is in general for CPS Energy, we have over 900,000 customers. And so a lot of times it's who are these customers? Well, we do have some large industrial commercial customers. That's about 2,000 customers that make up about 1% of our total customer base. Then we have over 80,000 small and medium businesses. That's 9% of our customer base, and then the rest of them is made up by residential customers. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on who these customers are. Maybe. There we go. So when we think about our large and industrial commercial customers, most times I think people think about the manufacturing companies, maybe data centers. But when you look at San Antonio, there's a reason why we're called Military City USA, right? So for us, that it's reflected in our commercial customer base. So we do have manufacturers. We also have data centers, but the majority of our commercial customer base is made up by military as well as city buildings. On top of that, we have hospitals, so the large hospital centers, medical centers, and over 1,200 schools, in the independent school districts that we support, as well as our big grocers, so where we go and get our stores. Now, for our small, medium business customers, this is a large variety of mix when you think of these customers, but this includes our apartment complexes, so think of your all bills paid communities, as well as some of those strip centers. But it's also your mom and pop shops, so it might be a coffee shop, one of those franchise fast food places, a hair salon, nail salon, tattoo shop. Yes, ma'am. So it's large, I'm sorry, this is then when we look at the large and industrial commercial customers. So the small and medium business makes up the majority of our commercial customers. And then we have the percentages broken out for who these customers are, and tattoo shops, doctors' offices. Think of your community churches; they fall into this grouping as well. And then for the next piece, I want to introduce us to introduce a concept really that United Way uses. So the United Way has been trying to find the right way to represent the base that they're trying to support. And so they call it ALICE, and they have a whole thing. You can go through United Way websites, and it's who is ALICE, and you can meet ALICE and kind of learn about the decisions that ALICE has to make. But I'm going to just read you a little bit about what ALICE represents. ALICE is asset limited, income constrained, employed customers. So these are customers that are really, they're earning more than the federal poverty limit, but they are still living paycheck to paycheck. So it spans all races, ages, ethnicities, but this is the workers who are struggling just to make the price of goods. So the majority of people here have multiple jobs. So they go from one job to another job, and they have to make the decision of what are you paying for food? Are you paying for a utility bill, or how do you make your dollar go as far as you possibly can? So this is really, when you think about how this fits in with San Antonio, and as of the data from United Way, it was as of 2018, and they're in the process of refreshing their numbers, but more than half of the San Antonio, Bexar County area falls either in the customers in poverty level or as an ALICE customer. So those customers who are working, living paycheck to paycheck. So when we think about who we want to focus on for energy burden, how we want to support our customer base, or where we want to see who's going to pay for customers that we're going to help, we just got to think through that this is what our customer base here in San Antonio or Bexar County looks like. And consistently what customers on the residential side, and this doesn't matter what your income level is, I want to be able to predict what I need to pay. I'd like for it to be as consistent as possible. And then if something comes up in my life, I need you to be flexible and supportive of that. So I know that there was additional questions for as a follow-up to Brattle. So for those of you who are here 2 years ago, I know it's been a while, we had Brattle do a presentation on energy burden and what the assessment was. We are working with them to refresh data. It is still 2021 data on what it looks like for our customers from an energy burden perspective. And for those, we do use the ACEEE definition. So it's your total utility costs, so gas and electric, divided by the your income levels. And according to kind of the just general accepted practice around energy burden, 6% is high. So a burden of 6% or more is considered high. A burden more than 10% is considered severe. And so I just wanted to refresh this information from a couple years ago for those of you who hadn't seen it. And what we did ask for Brattle to do was to come back and help us see what the average energy burden is, and then also cross-reference that with census tracts. So they had done this before, but we wanted to know what that actual number was. So how many customers are we, are kind of those ones that are impacted the most? They live in a census tract that has been identified as low income or vulnerable, and that they have a high energy burden. And according to the 2019 data that we had from Brattle, it was about 47,000 customers. And like I said, we're in the process of getting this refreshed for 2021 data from Brattle. And once we have that information, we'll be able to share it. But just wanted to put some hard numbers to some information that we've gotten before. And also in line with what Brattle talked about, they talked about the energy burden from a rate perspective, but then they also talked about the experience that customers have from a past due perspective. And we're still working on refining our data to see who are those customers that really are energy burdened as well as residing in a census tract. And so this up here shows it's dollars, but number of accounts also is represented up here. It's just the concentration by zip code and census tract of where we're currently seeing our highest past due balances. And a lot of it is, unfortunately, it's everywhere. So, but when we think about where we're doing our outreach and where we're targeting messaging around assistance programs, and as well as where Jesse Hernandez and his team targets utility fares, a lot of times we are now honing in on leveraging the census tract data as well as kind of who are those customers we believe are impacted the most, so we can help improve access to assistance. And kind of along those same lines, you'll see here who has currently enrolled in our affordability discount program. So we worked really hard last year as a result of the rate increase to be able to enroll more people into the affordability discount program. And, you know, when you look at it, in San Antonio, the poorest zip code is 78207, and that is where we have the highest concentration of people enrolled in our affordability discount program. So we're still trying to make sure that we are refreshing our data. We're looking at how we're targeting customers to make sure the right customers are getting the best assistance out of the programs that we currently have. And I know that Rick's going to talk more about the different information related to our affordability discount program. But when we think about who our customers are and who it is that's receiving assistance, just wanted to map that out for you. Yes, ma'am.
Past you. Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. I can't hear you on that. Okay, no problem. So 78207 has the most households on the discount program.
Right.
So my question is 07, how many of those individuals or households, I should say, I'm sorry, are past due?
I can follow up. I don't have that information,
Okay.
those numbers here.
That would be fine. Then if, I think it was a slide before, I got lost in the legend there. So you have $1 past due in blue and then $1 past due in orange. And that is just 1 month in the orange. It says October.
Qualified census tracts. So what that means is that the ones that you see in orange means that those are the folks who reside in a census tract as well as have a past due balance.
Got it.
So we were trying to find a way to leverage the information on who's the most in need.
Okay. And then the slide before that on energy burden, first per quartile. So first, I want to understand the first quartile is being, you have the red dotted is energy burden threshold of what you were talking about before, 6%, correct? Okay, and you have, we had 27%.
So what this
indicates
So this is breaking up their income quintile. So when you see
Okay.
first, second, third, fourth, fifth, that's based on income
Income.
quintile. And then when we asked Brattle to overlay the census tract
Okay.
data, we said, give us the breakdown of kind of what is the frequency of, what's the highest energy burden? So of the first quintile,
Right.
income quintile,
Okay.
you have those that have an energy burden of up to 27%. And as low as, I guess that's going to be more than that's about 4%.
Okay.
So it's just the ranges within those income quintiles.
Okay, but it doesn't indicate where that might be. So that 27%, we're not sure if it's concentrated in one census tract or zip code? Or
No, it's all of those,
okay.
it's all of the qualified census tracts.
Okay,
It's
okay.
the most burden.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. And then when we overlay the two of them, that's where we get the total of the 47,000 customers.
It's kind of hard to even read on our copy, but if I think I'm trying to understand this. We just always talked about the fifth quintile as being the low income, but that's the high income there. So you just kind of flipped it around, right?
Yes.
And then if I'm looking at the first quintile, then you're saying that the whole quintile as an average is about 10% or something a little over 9. But then you're saying of that people in that quintile, then are you going 20%, 20%, 20%, and 20% with the next 4 colors? Is that what that's, I mean, if I'm saying the 27, is that, if there's 5 bars there, okay, I divide 5 into 100,
Right.
coming up with 20. So is that saying that 20% of the first quintile are at 27, but you also have 20% that are down around less than 6%? Is that, am I reading the chart right?
No, it's aligned with their census tract. So the blue, this blue line, so you have the dark blue, which is just the general average for San Antonio.
Yeah.
This blue line is the most burdened census tract. So it's taking the most burdened census tract. It's the definitions of the different types of census tracts and saying what is that
Well, that's
there. So it's really taking the best way I can say it is, so the other end, like the pink, these are the least burdened census tracts.
okay, but you've got that for the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth quintiles. So are you saying of the census tracts that are burdened, then 20% of them are about a little over 5%? Are the last, what I'm trying to say is, since those are grouped up, and this is a Brattle thing, but if those are grouped up, are those last 5 lines, are those breaking down something in the first line, or do they just completely not relate? I don't understand.
We have Brattle on the line.
Yeah.
They want to unmute to help.
Well, yeah, but I mean, this, let somebody talk about it. First line, or do they just completely not relate?
They may not be on. Are they on the
I
web?
don't understand.
So,
We have Brattle on the line.
okay.
Yes, yes. If I can offer some clarification. Okay, so could I offer some clarification here, because this is one of those a bit difficult to read charts. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, I get some echo. Okay, so could I offer some clarification here, because it's one of those a bit difficult to read charts.
So this is Adrian Garcia with CPS. I think you have the live stream opened from our website. That may be the issue there.
Oh, okay. Let me try this again. Do I come across good?
Good. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's what we've done to create this chart. So first of all, we took about 374 census tracts or so in the Bexar County, and we've grouped them into 5 census burden areas. So we created 5 groupings. The first grouping is the lowest median income census tracts, and there were about 72 of them, and we call them most burdened census tracts. And then we looked at the next 72. So these are the second most burdened census tracts. And we basically went with this approach, and then our last 72 is the least burdened census tract grouping. And again, roughly there are 72 census tracts or so in each of these groups. And those are basically the colors that you see in these bar charts. So the teal bar represents the most burdened 72 census tracts, and the green bar represents the second most burdened census tracts, and the pink bar represents the least burdened 72 census tracts. So then we took another cut at this data. So after we came up with these groupings, then we look at within each group, what are the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth income quintiles. So in other words, within each burden area, we looked at the median incomes by the income quintile. So when you look at the first income quintile set of bars here, that's essentially showing the first income quintile of each of these 5 burden areas. And what this information is telling you is, in the most burdened census tracts, the energy burden is at roughly 27% when you look at the first income quintile. If you look at the second most burdened census tracts, the energy burden is roughly 13% when you look at the first income.
Can you clarify what percent of what you're talking about?
So I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
You say it's a 27% energy burden. What does that mean?
So that means that when you look at the median income in the first quintile of the most burdened census tracts, those customers are spending 27% of their income on their electricity and gas bills.
Okay. Thank you.
But does that help at all in terms of understanding this chart? Because, you know, like I have to admit, there are just too many things going on in this chart.
I don't know if this is right. I'd like to ask a question. Is that all right if I do?
Sure, let's go ahead and open this up for, don't leave. Okay, yeah, we'll open up for questions, and I'll take a list here and just let me know who wants to speak. Dana, you're first.
I just want to know where we're going with this. I mean, we all have been told for a long time that a lot of people are having trouble paying their bills. And this look like it's been going on for years. Where are we going with this?
Dana, I think that was you. So this is just to show to start with who our total customer base is, and then just to give a perspective on counts on numbers of customers. So we've talked a lot about what energy burden is, and just put into perspective who our customers are, challenges that they face, and it's going to help, I believe, inform, just give you more information. So as you have a discussion later on, it'll help inform what potential questions we want to answer, you want to answer or tackle from a RAC perspective.
Well, to continue, we were using data from 2018, and I think one of the charts said that a certain percentage of the people basically, it was like too much money, or something like that. So, I mean, what's happened to those people in 2018 as to now? I mean, is it the same, and how are they still around? I mean, how does this work here?
So that was the 2018 data was from United Way. They are going to be refreshing that data in April, so we don't have that information now. But in what we've seen so far, it's about the same percentages. We've just got to wait to see the data. It's the most current data that we had access to be able to put into perspective of who our customer base is.
Okay.
Go ahead, Kirk. Use the microphone, Mike.
You know, it's not surprising to see that poorer people have more trouble paying their power bill than richer people. You could probably create the same graphs for, you know, groceries and medical and whatever else. So I think the relevant question is like where in our context, the data specific to what we're trying to understand here is where do you go from this? But it's just, I mean, honestly, I didn't give too much thought to this because it's saying, you know, poor people have more trouble paying their power bill than rich people. You know, okay, and it's good to have some numbers around that, but really the principle of, you know, what's the right way to handle that problem is what I'm more interested in.
Thank you, Kurt. I guess my concern is if you group these things up into 5 groups, do these numbers to the right of each one of the blue bars relate to the original blue bar? And if I heard the lady right on the phone, they're really 2 different things. Okay, so they don't relate, even though they're together.
You could
So-
think of the navy bar as the grouping of all the 5 bars to the right of it. So basically the navy bar is for San Antonio as a whole. So it reflects the basically combination of all the bars to
Okay,
the right of
okay,
it.
okay, it does relate then. It was what I was asking. If you take the blue bar, that's the people that are in the lower income quintile. And then if you look at the bars next to it, of those people in the lower income quintile, they live in the zones, the census tracts that are the worst, they're at 27, and those census tract come down. So what it is related. Okay, that's what I needed to understand. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Peter. All right.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Reed.
Peter.
Peter Onofre. Deanna, thank you for the presentation, and also thank you for all the work that you and your team do in the outreach and getting to know the customers, and I really appreciate that perspective. Don't have a question, just want to acknowledge the value of the data, and my questions will come in the next presentation that Rick's providing, where we're looking at scenarios where we can have a better understanding of why we would choose one potential plan to support for assisting those low-income customers. So I appreciate the data, appreciate the work that Bradley's done as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Anthony, go ahead. Take that down.
Okay. Yeah, I have a question. This is regarding census tracts. And census tracts are great for looking at demographics of communities. And I'd be interested in knowing if CPS could identify census tracts that fall into the criteria of those that are most stressed in terms of hardest challenges to pay, because census tracts are going to give you demographics, things like population, median income, percent of owner-occupied households, the percent of renters, things with regard to the age of the homes within census tracts. Those are very important components that will help us understand the policies that would emulate from these studies. So my personal request is that if y'all could provide information regarding the specific census tract so that I could, at least for my own sake, evaluate the demographic backdrop for these discussions.
Yes, sir, we absolutely can. So when we look at our targeted outreach, as well as on the slide 9 for past due balances, the highlight that we use there, the census tracts are specific to those that have a 50% or more of their households are below 60% of the area medium, area medium gross income. So it really is trying to target, these are the customers that are most impacted or potentially most vulnerable. So it's one level more that we can leverage to get to the right customers, so we can provide additional information based on those qualified census tracts.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Andy.
Hello. One quick question on small and medium businesses. I see that apartments are lumped into that. So how does that affect how I would believe most people that are in apartments are low-income customers. So that, how does that affect how you say that, the segment is the largest in number of customers compared to residential?
Right. So for the apartment complexes that fall under their small and medium businesses, they count as one account because that they are on all bills paid. We don't have the ability to know how many residents are inside of those apartment complexes. So to your point, there are more customers impacted by that account, but unfortunately, we don't have insight to it. We just know that it's one account. So it gets, the majority of apartments here are not all bills paid, but the ones that are tend to be those that are low income.
So then we might be missing out on a lot more information since we're lumping everyone into that one apartment complex.
We just have limited information because there's information we have access to on the account, and it's really just the owner. So there could be more there. We just don't have access to that information.
Okay.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Okay, just one other question. On the slide where it's describing the Alice customers. So I'm looking, it says 52% of Bear County households were unable to make ends meet, so living paycheck to paycheck. Now, is that 52% of households that are classified as Alice or 52% of households overall in Bear County?
That's Bear County total.
Really? 52%? Okay.
And
I wanted to be sure I understood that. And you said it's 2018 data. So that's going to be recycled or refreshed in April.
It's going to be refreshed in April. We've developed a relationship with United Way so that we can get access to the data sets that they have and start overlaying that with ours. So once we have that, we can share that with you. But to that point, when we think about who we're helping, that also means someone else has to pick up the load, pick up that share.
Exactly.
So when you think about how you're redistributing, who's picking it up, by understanding who your customer base is, it helps you identify potentially where some lines should be drawn.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah, I would really look forward to getting that refreshed data. That's very startling statistics.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Stan. All right. Now, Rick, Luna. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. You guys got to get your name in here or we got to move on. Okay. So put your hands up.
So back on slide 7, and we don't have to bring it up. That's the one where we say for residential customers, the average kilowatt hour per bill is 1,128 kilowatt hours. But then down below, that's where we broke out, the percentages of customers that were poverty Alice customers or above Alice customers. I'm curious if we have or can get what the average kilowatt hours per bill is broken out by those 3 categories. In other words, is the above Alice group using a lot more energy? It's a piece of information we may need to know when we start thinking about rate redesign and demand charges and things.
That's a great question, and we're working to get that data. So if we can get it, we will make sure we share that out with you. Thank you.
Okay, and then one more question, and again, this is one we won't have the answer now. Thinking back 2 years ago when Brattle was going through all these slides, I do recall them talking about or at least somebody's opinion of the best way to help those that are most energy burdened. And I was wondering if we could go back and ask Brattle what they think the best way to help those energy burdened people or customers are.
Sure. I think you just asked them. They're probably online. Okay. Anybody else? Oh, okay. Go ahead.
On page 8 again, energy burden view, the income quintile, where is that defined? Or those 5, the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth, are they defined somewhere?
What in terms of what their dollar ranges are, or?
Is that what we're defining, the dollar range, or?
We'll get Brattle to add clarity and maybe redistribute this slide to make it a lot easier.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Going? All right. Thank you, Dana. Rick, where are you? Luna? He's somewhere. Oh, there he is. That post there's a lot of folks liking behind that.
Okay, thank you, Reed. Good afternoon, everyone. Rick Luna. So I'm here in a new role today. I moved over to the strategic pricing and cost recovery area about 3 months ago. Previously, I was with the STEP program, but we'll be talking today about a similar topic about how we assist our low-income customers, and we're going to focus specifically on bill relief or rate relief is what Reed called it. This is really discounts that we offer our customers for our low-income customers to help reduce their bill. And so we'll talk a little bit about what we currently offer through our affordability. It's called the Affordability Discount Program, ADP, and then show you how that impacts customer bills. And we're going to use energy burden sort of as a way to show you, what the differences are on customers on the net outcome for a customer bill. And then, obviously, if someone asked the question, or where are we going with this? What we wanted to do today was share with you some scenarios, just for discussion, right? We're certainly not recommending any of these, but the question was, how do we move the needle? What would that look like? And so we've put together some numbers to hopefully prompt some discussion, and we're certainly happy to answer questions as we go through this. Okay. So the current program, again, ADP, Affordability Discount Program, this provides a flat monthly discount to our customers. And there's in total, it comes out to about $16. Now that's a combination of electric and gas discounts. So the electric is $11 roughly. The gas discount is just over $4. And you see there the number of customers who participate in this. In total, it's about 65,000 customers who benefit from either one or both, most or both discounts. And the program is funded at about $11.6 million, which is recovered from all other customers. And so there is a bill impact to this of roughly 62 cents per monthly bill. That's residential. Of course, the more you use, the more that the bill impact accumulates. And slide 17 in the deck that we provided you has the breakdown for each of the rate classes. So we're going to use residential today because that's the one we normally get questions on and speak to, but obviously it does apply to all other bills. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
A little earlier, we saw 47,000. We're in two categories of, I think, heavily burdened and severely burdened. It came to a total of like 47. This one is 65 to qualify for this ADP. So is there a different criteria play, or is it different timing, or?
Well, so the 47,000 number that you're speaking to was, and it was a little confusing. That was a combination of two of the bars on that graph.
Right.
That's not actually the number of customers who are energy burdened. We're going to get to that here in just a minute if we can come back to that because it's a bigger number. I guess long and short of it, we think it's more like 130,000 customers that fall into the.
Yeah, I saw that later, and then
Yeah.
That's why the 47,000 kind of threw me, but maybe it's not apples to apples, so
Yeah.
I'll wait for the answer.
Okay. Great.
Yep.
Okay, so eligibility criteria. This is for the ADP discount. This is a combination of course, low income. So 125% of the federal poverty guideline is the threshold. So the more people in the home, the higher the threshold for that. And they have to meet one of the other criteria, over 60 years old of age or older. Probably the ones that, will jump out the most is either school-age children, 18 and under, or preschool age children would qualify someone. So it's a combination of the income and one of these qualifying criteria. There's also an allowance for extenuating circumstances that either CPS or the city of San Antonio would determine. So again, in total, today we've got roughly 65,000 customers who fall into these criteria. Okay, so energy burden, we were talking about that earlier. This is the formula that is used to calculate that. So energy burden equals your annual electric bill plus your gas bill divided by the household income. And again, this is annual number. The thresholds that we've been talking about, these were set by the ACEEE, basically established a threshold at 6%. Anything higher than that, they consider to be high energy burden. Beyond 10% is severe energy burden. So clearly someone in 27% threshold, I mean, you're way up there in terms of energy burden. Okay, so we'll start getting into some of the analysis that we did. And we're starting here.
Can we stop there? And I have a question.
Yeah, absolutely.
On the previous slide, you said that an average low bill was $145 a month. So, and the energy burden of a lot of people was 27%. So $145 is more than 27% of somebody's monthly income?
I'm sorry. I'm not sure I follow the $147. Where, I'm sorry, where did,
One of the previous slides said an average bill was $145. So,
in the first presentation. Okay, got it.
And then you were saying people are burdened, like a lot of people are burdened because it's more than 27% of their income.
Right. So one thing that may be helpful is
that's like $500 a month or something like that.
Yeah. So let me, if I can point you to slide 18 in the deck that I shared with you, which is the very last slide, slide 19. This has let me go ahead and jump to that. I think it's important to point this out. So slide 19 has the quintiles. So, you know, basically what qualifies someone to be in that lowest income quintile. That would have a mean household income of $13,000 a year. So if you think about that, that means there are some folks, you know, so it goes anywhere from $0 to $25,000, $26,000. So yeah, I mean, there might be someone in that quintile who.
So using these numbers, if you take somebody's burden at 27% of their income, 27% of $13,000 is.
It's about
$3,500 divided by 12. It's almost $300 a month as a bill. Now, on an earlier slide, you said the low average bill was 145. So these numbers aren't really working here.
Yeah. As they're pointing out in the room, these are averages. And Jesse, maybe Jesse can lend.
It doesn't matter if they're averages. You know, you were using averages for $145 a month as a bill. And you were saying people are burdened, lots of people are burdened because their energy bill is 27% of their income. I mean, you know, I'd like to see the numbers that show that, because what you've shown doesn't prove that. Doesn't even come close.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jesse Hernandez. I'm Senior Director over Equity and Customer Strategy and Engagement here at CPS Energy. And my team happens to run the affordability discount program in all our low-income programs, including Casa Verde. So just to put a little bit in perspective, you know, Deanna mentioned the $145 a month average bill. And, you know, we have, I would venture to say, thousands of customers who have $0 to the $500 a month monthly income. We had an event this past Monday here at our headquarters with Bexar County, and there was hundreds of customers here in this very same room that many of those customers that I spoke with and helped them fill out applications had zero income. And so those are customers that rely on Meals on Wheels. They rely on the food bank. They rely on other assistance to be able to do that and to make ends meet. So that's where we're able to speak to, you know, having no income and having that super high energy burden where it just, they're not able to pay or afford that bill.
I think there's a lot more discussion that needs to happen here before you start using mean household incomes and average bills and everything else. And if there are a lot of people that don't make anything, I mean, how do they get by at all? Meals on Wheels doesn't cut it. You have to have someplace to live.
I think these lines of questions are really offensive coming from Dana, who's not a poor person. You're like trying to grasp the reality of poverty without experiencing poverty.
You don't know anything about
Okay,
it. Let
Dana,
him talk.
okay, we have a discussion coming up in the last hour and a half. Let's hold the discussion for the discussion time. And let's just, if we have
What you
questions
say
about them,
says
no,
a
let me
lot.
just, let me go back with this. What we're trying to do is get through the presentations here and understand the presentations. So let's go through that, and I'll turn it back over to Rick.
Thank you, Reed. You know, to the point of, yes, these are averages, right? These are meant to be a starting point for analysis. You know, there's always a distribution behind an average, and we're happy to dig into the distributions if that would help, you know, as a next step. But so let me talk through what we did here. So we looked at, you know, so an energy burden customer could be in the first or the second quintile. Those are the two lowest income quintiles. And what we did was to look at what the math looks like in terms of, you know, how much it reduces the average bill, and then what the energy burden differential looks like. And so on the left, assuming that customer is in the first income quintile, we simply took the average bill for that quintile based on usage and divided by annual income. And so before the discount, it's 10%. So that's the severe threshold. When you apply the $16 a month, $194 a year, that then is lowered to 8.7% energy burden. So, you know, that's how the discount helps, right? On the right-hand side, assuming the same, you know, customer, but they're in the second income quintile, you notice the difference, the $35,000. So we're assuming a higher income here. That's the average for that quintile. And then you can see that they're below the high threshold. So they're below the 6%. And then, of course, this helps, you know, lower it a little bit more. Yes, ma'am.
Just a quick question, so I be sure I understand the bill. Does this also include the adjustment cost and all of that?
This is the
When you
total.
talk about the
total
whole bill.
This is the total electric and gas bill.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's what you see at the bottom.
Okay. We wanted to talk a little bit about weatherization, and, you know, a lot of the ADP customers have also participated in weatherization. We thought this was an interesting view that might help the discussion. And so what we've done here is, assuming that the ADP customers also were one of the 30,000 customers who've had their home weatherized, you know, the STEP program is going to have another 16,000 homes that we weatherize. You know, what does that do to the bill? And so, of course, through weatherization, you know, the customer gets, you know, insulation and other upgrades to their home, which is going to save them energy every year going forward. We're estimating that at about $490 a year in additional energy savings through that efficiency improvement. And this is coming out of our latest report. This number has been going up partly because we've gotten better in terms of managing the program, but also costs have gone up, the cost of energy. And so that benefit is bigger. But anyway, you see here the math. It really makes a big difference. For a customer in the first quintile, you know, you now go from 8.7% to now 5%. So it really does help move the needle there. Okay, so you know, there are limitations with the ADP program. We want to go ahead and, you know, talk through that. One is, of course, there's more need than the number of customers we have enrolled today. Back to the 130,000 customers that's what Brattle estimates our energy burden in our community, and the program assists 65,000. So there's obviously more need there. The ADP program is a flat monthly discount, and so if you have more people in the home, or if your home is more energy inefficient, you know, it's not going to help you if you use a lot more energy, right? It's just the same discount for every customer. So, you know, there are utilities that have discounts that scale with usage, and so we'll show what that could look like.
You got a question here from Kurt.
As a, you know, a manager of this program, in a perfect world, do you have as a principle that the ADP discount should scale with usage and should relate in some manner to the degree of energy efficiency of the home, or or not? You're saying it doesn't today, and I'm not
Mm-mm.
criticizing that, but I'm just saying as a principle or as an aspiration, do you think you'd like to move to that?
Well, I think what we have done is tried to benchmark. Last month we spent a lot of time looking at what other utilities are doing. And this is one that jumped out to us as a practice that some utilities have pursued, and we want to bring it forward as something to consider.
Okay, so you're not taking a position that this is the right direction.
Right.
You're just putting it as a.
We're putting out there as what we have seen as other alternative strategies.
Okay, so, yeah, go ahead.
And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about in the
Okay.
last hour and a half.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay, and then the last thing is just to point out that, of course, customers move, income changes for the good and the bad, right? Things happen in people's lives. And so maintaining and managing this list is a manual process, and finding customers, getting them to apply, that poses a challenge. And so that's a reality of having to, try to implement this program. So we just want to share that because it's a reality we have to all take into account. Okay, so we developed some scenarios. I won't spend a lot of time on this slide other than to say that we looked at, okay, what if you increase the amount of the discount? What if you expand the eligible participating customers? And then the third scenario is, well, what if you do both? What if you both expand the discount, serve more customers, and then try to get the 6% energy burden for anybody in that first quintile? What does the math tell us about what that would take? And so starting here, this is what if we were to increase the discount. So today it's $16. You'll see there at the top, $11.6 million of program funding to support this. We're going to talk about incremental bill impact. There is a 62-cent bill impact. The numbers that we're going to show here after that are incremental to that. So I want to make sure to point that out. And so we look at it in the table there on the right. What if you increase the discount by $8, $16, and then what if you increase it by $30? What does that look like? And you'll see it, the bottom line there is in the biggest discount program, you'd have $33 million of spend to achieve that. And then on the left, you can see in terms of energy burden, you basically stair step, right? The bigger the discount, the more the energy burden is going down. To get to that 6% energy burden, it would take that $30 discount is what we're showing there. Okay. We talked about scaling with usage. This is an illustration of how that works. Austin Energy has this approach. Basically, you start with a flat discount. So we're using our $16 that we have today. And then if you added a variable component, you could do that for electric and gas. What the graph shows is how this would scale with usage. And again, the idea is someone who uses more energy, more people in the home, the house is not as efficient, they would get a little more benefit than someone who had maybe in an apartment who had lower usage, fewer people in the home. Okay. This is the second scenario. So here we're simply looking at what if you kept the current flat discount, $16, but you expanded the population that you serve. And so, plus 30,000 customers. And then the last one is basically doubling the size of the program to that roughly 130,000 customer population that we think is the energy burden group. And you can see the dollar figures there, $22 million. So basically doubling the size of the program, doubling the size of the bill impact for that. Okay, and then the last scenario is just, as I mentioned before, this is a combination scenario. So bigger discount, serve more customers. And then you can see here, so we get to the 6% energy burden through the $30 additional discount, and then you serve 129,000 customers. Obviously, the numbers are bigger here. This then becomes a $65 million program, so it's 5x of what we do today. And then the bill impact likewise, goes up, 5 times. So we wanted to share this as an illustration, right? Again, this is trying to put some reference points for you as you talk about, this program. This is just a summary. I won't spend much time here. This is the same data you saw on the earlier slides. We wanted to put it all in one place. And again, obviously we recognize the need in the community. What we wanted to do today was give you some reference points and open up a discussion. And again, it's based on averages. We can go back and refine the analysis, based on your feedback.
Okay, if we have questions that are clarification of the presentation, I can take them now. If we want to have discussion about what's in the presentation, we can have that at the second half of the meeting. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Reed. I'll try to stay on task with that direction, but I'll start with thanking you, Rick. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for all the work that you did with the STEP program. Of course, that's the weatherization, Casa Verde. And can we go to slide 13? I want to address all the scenarios in that one snapshot and ask, as we're looking at these and kind of in reference to the earlier information that we received on increasing that ADP. And as you said, if we were to increase it for that in that first quintile, only half of that first quintile would benefit from that first scenario. The second scenario would, in theory, incorporate that whole first quintile, the 130,000 that are there, but it would keep it at the same rate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that's how that applies to that next group. So you expand the benefit to that whole quintile, but you don't increase the amount of support.
Correct.
Okay. Then I want to come back to the first scenario because you have an alternative that I want to ask you more questions about, specific to how that would benefit and get some more information on it. But I'll move on to the third. So in the third is really the biggest ask of with that $2.85 residential bill impact, right? So then that's where we share in, and I know it's approximate to that third scenario, which basically impacts the energy burden for the whole quintile, and that's $30
$30 discount.
$30 added
Yeah. Yep.
to what's currently there, the 16, so
Right.
46.
Correct.
Okay. So now let's go, if we can go to slide 10, I'd like to get, now I want to ask you about this particular scenario. The variable discount and how it stays the same for that same quintile, right? Half the quintile, the first quintile would be impacted the same. Nothing would change other than that they would receive this variable discount. Can you explain how that would be factored in? And then also Austin, how long have they had that program? Is there any reports on how that program is working? And the way I understand it is for those that use high users, they have a large consumption, they're the ones that would benefit. So as it goes up, they pay less, right? Much like with the demand, when we talk about how the cost of service is the more you consume, the less it'll cost. And I know that there's more details in the cost of service that we'll get into later, but I just want to understand that scenario.
Yeah, and so what we did in this scenario was, and again, look, we were trying to figure out a way to communicate like this idea, this concept. So we said, okay, well, let's assume that, we were going to, increase funding by 50%. So the footnote here calls that out. So, we started there, right? And we said, okay, if we increase funding 50%, and then we put in a variable element, then how could we use some of those additional dollars to create, this new portion, right? And so these are numbers that we thought, would work nicely to kind of have that upward curve. And so that's what you see in the graph there, right? Is a customer who uses more energy would receive a bigger discount. I think there's pros and cons with that. I mean, the pro is, there's probably folks down here who have a lot of people in the house, children, and maybe they need a little more help. I think, the con is, are you encouraging more consumption? And maybe that's not the right approach. So someone who's more efficient might, we might encourage that by not doing something like this. So, I think there's two sides to that discussion. As far as Austin, I don't know exactly how long it's been variable. Maybe Madison or someone else could tell me. But this is what they currently, they're not using these numbers, but they offer this type of a program. And my understanding is they're going to add additional dollars to that as part of their latest rate case.
Yeah, I understand you can't provide that today, but if you can provide that information at some point, just so we'll know what all is there. And my last point is on slide 6. We can go to slide 6. This is the weatherization impact. And as many of you know, I've been a strong proponent of the new STEP program, and specifically proposed to the MUC that they establish a working group to evaluate the development of the new STEP program in order to maximize the benefits to the LMI customers and to create a broader collaborative that would really focus in. And this right here, I think, is your greatest impact. Of course, you have your ADP, which is just providing that benefit, but that weatherization goes so much further in so many other ways. And you could see that $494 in impact to those homes. And maximizing that work would, I think, have the greatest impact of all. And just in closing that thought, I want to thank all my colleagues on the RAC that have supported that working group concept, as well as CPS and the information that they've continued to provide. And I pray that you continue to collaborate in reference to how we can maximize that work. And I think a collaborative, the discussions we're having really in the weeds, and to be able to get that information that's required to make the best decision for CPS and for the RAC to be able to advise, we need to have that type of working group working in those numbers, because you heard it today, how confusing it can be, and we're dealing with averages and trying to maximize.
Let's talk about our discussion later. If we got questions on this, and this actually relates more to next month's discussion, which is the conservation piece, but it brought it in. Yeah, okay?
Thank you.
Now,
Just one last question about this.
yeah.
Will we be able to vote on this at some
Vote on
point?
what?
If this is going to be presented to the board, I'm asking a question for the future reference. If we don't ever come back to these three scenarios, I would recommend that when we get to a place, if it's being seriously considered to be presented as one of these 3 or 4 scenarios, that the RAC would have the opportunity to vote on which would be the most.
Peter, I actually have no idea how we're going to do this, okay?
That's just my recommendation.
So,
Reed.
well,
I don't expect an answer today. I
yeah.
just want to put the recommendation out there.
Yeah, we have to make a recommendation. How we get there, I can't honestly tell you right now, buddy, but we'll keep working on it, okay? One more here from Dr. Kenton.
Thank you, Rick. A question just for clarification. On the previous slide, we had the 5 quatriles, the quantiles or quartiles. Thank you. Put my accent somewhere else. So it seems like in that the first one, there's some variability on terms of energy burden. There's some that's as high as 27% and some that are below the 6%. So there is some variability there. So in the discount program, I want to be sure there's no variability. It's a flat rate.
The discount is flat.
Right. So
Yes.
we're not looking at energy burden and then adjusting at CPS. I mean, it's not doing
Yeah,
that.
and so the way this relates back to the graph you saw earlier was we're looking at the average here. You remember the blue bars in that last graph, which was the San Antonio average?
Yeah.
That's the number here. Obviously, there's going to be diversity in that number because it's an average. I mean, there's some higher and lower.
Right. But we know there's variability, but right now, the way CPS handles discount is that everybody
It's a
gets the
flat
same
discount.
discount.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
I understand we got a question on the presentation online. So if we can bring down the presentation and bring people back up, I'd appreciate it. Okay, I think looking at the chat, Anakwa, you've got a question?
Yeah, my question was, will these discount figures change post rate increase? Is that factored in? Is that what the variables are for?
The rate, if you have a rate increase, well, the last rate increase, your amount, your fixed amount, did it change?
Yeah, in the last rate case, we did expand the population by I think 14,000 customers, and the discount went up by $4.
Okay, so you did change it in the last rate case, which was about 2 years ago. They did, it was 18 months ago, they did change it. So I assume that, and again, you got to remember, whatever happens with the rates, we don't control that. It has to go through, obviously, the board and then go to the city council after Ben either recommends it or not. So it's something that has to take action at the rate level with the city council. But it did happen last time. Any other questions, Anakwa?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's go on to the next presentation. which is on the decoupling. All right, Shannon Ramirez, it's all yours. You even have your own mic.
Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about decoupling, and I wanted to just start a little bit of background. Our public input speakers gave great background, so I really appreciate it. This is not a new discussion. I would say over the past 2 decades, utilities have really been struggling with the issue of how to recover sufficient revenue from their customers. And remember, in Texas, that means sufficient revenue to cover their fixed costs. While the utilities are seeing a decrease in the sale of their services because of things like distributed energy resources and efficiency and conservation programs. So the traditional model said that utilities would increase their fixed charge per customer. So it would just go across the board and each customer pays a little bit higher of a fixed charge. This provides revenue stability for the utility, and it also provides bill predictability to the customer. But obviously, there are some obstacles to this model. One of the things that it does is really has a disproportionate impact on low-use customers. So same increase in your fixed charge, even if you're using less energy. It also sends mixed pricing signals because the normal market pricing signals do not work this way. Your price generally will stay the same if you're using the same amount of energy and you have that rate, or if you want to incentivize certain behavior, you pull the price down for the behavior that you want to incent. This doesn't work that way. It also doesn't necessarily incent customers to make the investments in their homes for distributed energy resources or to conserve because doesn't drive their bill down. So the response to this was smart rate design approach. Okay, it really started in California, but it is used in an awful lot of states now. There are a number of different rate design options that fall under smart rate design: time of use, minimum bills, and revenue decoupling, which is what we're going to talk about today. Each of these tools is just that, a tool to get you to a goal. So each one of them has a different purpose, and I strongly encourage you to consider your purpose as you evaluate a tool. Okay, so I believe that when you look at tools, you're agnostic as to them until you decide what purpose you want to use them for. So I encourage you to do that here. All of these are tools for achieving different things, and all of them are based on the idea that economic efficiencies for utilities can be achieved across their entire system based on long-term recovery of marginal costs. Okay, the reason that's important is that Texas law requires utilities in Texas to recover their fixed costs. So I'm going to talk about decoupling and how it exists everywhere else, and one of the challenges will be, can you or how could you make that model work where you've got to recover fixed costs, not marginal costs? So rate decoupling is defined as an adjustable rate mechanism to recover revenue requirements from ratepayers, and it breaks that link between the energy sold and the revenue connected. Okay, so I'm just going to pause a little bit for you to read that. Because again, that is a model that's entirely different to what we use in Texas. In Texas, what the law says is that you have to recover sufficient revenue to pay all of your fixed costs. It doesn't mean it's not allowed in Texas. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just a new definition. So I want to point that out. It can be used for electric and or gas. So you could pick one or the other. It is allowed for both. And really, again, I talked about it. It is adopted as an idea to help promote some of the distributed energy resource and the conservation efforts that are out there. If you look at how it works, and to me, I look at this, okay, what is it that's going to happen and what is the customer going to see? I've put the two formulas really for the traditional model and the decoupled system. Okay, a decoupled recovery factor is applied periodically to adjust a rate to meet revenue targets. And remember, the target for us is recovering sufficient revenue to cover our fixed costs. So what it looks like to a customer is the utility sets up its estimated revenue that it's going to require for that period of time. A lot of people do it annually, but you could do this monthly if you wanted to. So they estimate the amount of revenue that they need
And then they apply that across the board, and that's the rate. You go through that period of time, and then there is a true up. So if there were higher than forecasted sales, you're going to need to reduce it because you came in over your estimate. And that would result in a rebate to each customer because your rate's going to be adjusted. Lower than forecasted sales, you're going to need a higher rate. So there's going to be a surcharge. So as a customer, what you're going to see is that you know your rate at the beginning of the month or the year. You go through that month of year or year, then there's a true up and you get a rebate or you pay a surcharge to true up your actual versus estimated costs. Now, again, most people do it annually. You can do it monthly. And if you look at, and this is, I'm actually looking at a study that was done within the past 10 years. This is not used in Texas, but it is used in an awful lot of states. So I don't have a utility in Texas to pull from because it isn't used here. But when they did a study and looked at it, the adjustment up or down is usually 2 to 3% for residential, 4 to 3% up or down respectively. Sorry, I said the first was residential, the second was commercial. Now, if you look at overall, what happens most of the time? Does it go up or does it go down? They're adjusted up 60% of the time and down 40% of the time. So again, just to pause because it's an entirely different structure. You know your rate, you go through your month, that month is trued up. You're generally going to shift somewhere between 2 and 4% of your bill up or down. And it's a surcharge or a rebate. Now, one of the things that I do want to point out about this, I did a whole lot of research to make sure I could talk to you really clearly today. You guys are highly educated on the CPS system and on the utility system. In order to communicate this effectively to a customer base, there would have to be a really robust education and communication program. And I do think one of the factors that you would need to consider is, is our community interested in all of the things you would have to be interested to understand a bill that goes up and down when not driven by your own use? Okay, so I think that's, and again, I'm not saying it's a pro or a con, I'm just saying it's something I think that you want to consider. I think it's also important to point out, Deanna referenced it earlier in her presentation. It does increase the volatility of a customer's bill somewhat, meaning it's not going to stay flat. That is a little less predictability. The percentage range isn't huge, but I do just want to point that out because I think it's important as y'all talk through this to consider. I'm going to go to the next slide. Oh, I'm in a board meeting. Someone's going to do it for me. If you look at rate decoupling, there's a couple of different ways to do it. And I think you could do all of some, part of one, none of another, and really think about how this works. Full decoupling truly breaks it. So what you do is you say, okay, I know that I need this much revenue from the customers. You go through and you look at the revenue that you actually got based on your actual sales. And then any deficit that you have, you use that surcharge or that rebate to true up entirely. There's also limited decoupling where you could choose to do that with just a portion of it. And then partial decoupling, and I just want to point out, I have no idea why they would name it limited and partial because I can't make a distinction there in the words. But partial decoupling is where you just pick part of it, but use it for certain programs. And although it's not truly rate decoupling, I would say that the best example of the idea is how we do STEP right now. Just as we talked about just a little bit ago, that's just a program whose costs we're trying to recover. So we take the costs of that program and then we spread it out to all of the other customers. So that is what partial decoupling could look like in the rate instance. There can be separate revenue targets based on your different classes, and there can be different recovery factors for different groups. One thing I do want to point out to you, though, I spoke to you all last month, 2 months ago, I can't even remember now, about Texas law. And I just want to remind you that when you go through the decoupling discussion, you have to remember all of those principles that we talked about before, all of the other legal and administrative requirements. We'll go over them a little bit at the end, but those will all still apply. I've put together a list of pros and cons, and I'm going to go ahead and let you all read those in detail. And I will tell you this, because it doesn't exist in Texas, I'm not pulling from Texas programs. It also isn't used a lot by municipal utilities. A lot of these are investor-owned utility programs. So some of the pros and cons may not line up entirely directly with CPS Energy, but I wanted to give you as much information as I could so that you all could have a robust discussion. One of the reasons why it doesn't work great for a Texas municipally owned utility is that this tool is specifically designed, remember, to stabilize revenue. A municipal owned utility is not designed to maximize our revenue. So we are interested in being sure that the bills get paid, but we are not designed to maximize our revenue. So some of them align a little bit off. When you look at the pros, it really does reduce the need to drive the business based on desire to increase sales, okay? So you don't have, you take that out just a little bit. And in that way leaves room, some would argue, for incentivizing distributed energy resources and efficiency and conservation programs. Because both of those factors obviously reduce the amount of electricity that we sell rather than increase it. It does provide financial certainty to the utility. It's a much easier way for utilities to ensure their revenue stream is accurate, has lower variability, and is trued up in shorter increments. And so it reduces the financial risks. To me, I think it's debatable. I think that if you asked a large group of people if variability in their rates by between 2% and 4% every month would help or hurt, you might have a split opinion on that. I think predictability would override for some, but actual full true up of that might benefit some. There is a reduce in volatility in really good, times that we've really overshot, but there's also the risk of much higher volatility in a time period where I'm just imagining if we had a year where we had 2 extreme weather events in the same year. So you had use that highly pushed beyond what was estimated. 2 highly volatile events where your bill is much higher than you thought it could be would be very impactful, and we've seen that in our history. If you look at some of the cons, again, there is confusion about the pricing signals. To me, I think that it's a little bit hard to understand rates being higher when less energy is used than forecasted versus less energy than I used. I think, as I've talked to Deanna over the years, one of the common things that we hear for customers is if they can understand what's driving their bill and predict their bill, they are much happier than if they cannot. This pushes more towards the cannot. It does encourage the adoption, I think, of distributed energy resources and energy efficiency programs, but it does have a higher impact on some of the low-income customers who are going to bear that same cost, but are not as likely to have invested in that same resource. It may create some imbalances, and it oftentimes requires the adoption of complementary programs or policies to ensure you're getting to that goal you want to get to using this tool. A lot of what we talked about, I've hit on it before. This really was not aimed at not-for-profit utilities. So as you consider it, you'd have to think about how to tweak it for an MOU. I also want to point out that CPS Energy through STEP already has the largest energy efficiency program in Texas. So I think, you guys hit on it a little bit before, but I do think that there's an overlap there to be considered. And I do want to remind you that this only applies to fixed costs. So non-fuel revenue, like the fuel adjustment charge, and any regulatory adjustment is not going to be decoupled. Okay, so that rate stays the same and goes up and down according to what actually flows through on the bill. This wouldn't touch that. And then the takeaways, just to point out that really the effectiveness and the success of this tool that you can use really depends on what kind of program is adopted and how it's implemented. I do think that you ought to look at it and determine, does it have the ability to reach the goals that you as a group are setting for the rate design program? And I'm just throwing out goals, not saying they're yours, but just as examples: affordability, energy efficiency, reducing demand, or revenue stability. And then last, I'm just going to remind you, I referenced them before, some of the legal considerations in Texas that you will have to keep in mind as you go through this discussion on decoupling is that in Texas, rates must be primarily based on providing the cost of service to each customer class. So this doesn't remove that idea that not only do you have to recover all of your fixed costs as a utility, you should roughly be recovering the cost of providing service to that customer class from that customer class. Rates have to be just and reasonable. They can't be discriminatory, and they must be sufficient, equitable, and consistent in application to each class of consumer. Again, no decoupling in Texas, but it is in 2/3 of the other states. And it's not expressly authorized or prohibited by any law in Texas. The PUC has issued no guidelines on how you would use it, so it's not been tested in Texas either. In response to a 2015 legislation, the only PUC comment that I could find on decoupling was a report that concluded that decoupling is an artifact of regulation, relatively difficult to maintain, and allows continuation of cross subsidies. I will fully acknowledge that I have no idea what you would do with that guidance. Only to say that in 2015, the Texas legislature did not seem too hot on it, but they didn't prohibit it. So it is allowed in Texas, has not been tested in Texas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Ramirez. Okay, now we're right up to the break time. We can do different things. Let's take a few questions on the presentation, okay? Not on the discussion. Okay, no speeches, all right? Okay. Anybody got any questions? Go ahead.
Why are we talking about this if it's not allowed?
Because it's not prohibited, and it certainly is an idea that this group has raised in the past, and I think is one of the solutions that the country is considering. So I just wanted to lay out the basics and how it aligns with Texas law so that you're aware it's not prohibited, but these were the guardrails within which you could consider it.
Okay, in the line of no speeches?
Right, no speeches. Yeah, we'll get those later.
Yeah, I got a question.
Question, yeah.
In the other states, has the study been done? Are there increased costs or back office costs to true up after every period of every month or every year? Are there increased costs to do that true up calculation?
I don't know of a study that shows that, but I'm just telling you, to me, going through a rate case every 2 years versus doing the same true up that you would need to do monthly or annually would increase. There would be some administrative holding cost to administer a program. There is for every program.
Would each one of these changes require a rate case?
No, I think that one of the benefits, so the next time, if you decided we're going to implement decoupling right now, the way it would work is you set that base rate, which is the estimate of the rate that you're going to apply over the next year. That is the rate case. So you could start by, you establish that base rate and the formula for which you calculate the rebate or the surcharge, all of the details of how you're recovering from each class, and that is the rate case. I think other states would say using a decoupled method allows you to go longer in between rate cases. I would just caveat that with, I don't know a utility that goes longer between rate cases than CPS Energy. Just period, IOUs or.
Okay, we got another question here, Kurt.
Let's say we had decoupling and it comes time for us to set, you guys to set a revenue number. And under Texas law, as you explained, we have to cover fixed costs. We have to account for cost of service to each class. But you have a minimum number now. Isn't that number always going to be higher than under the status quo, all other things being equal? Now, I realize it could be rate adjustments later, monthly, because of these true-ups, but isn't that budget number you start with always going to be higher than the number you would set under the current budget-making parameters?
I'm looking at Chad, our rates guy, to say that when I venture into budget land, I think I make them all tick a little bit. No, it's a good question.
Just tell me the question one more time. I was trying to follow you.
So the revenue number that you are going to set now, given the other parameters of how we have to look at revenue here that apply in Texas, isn't that number, at least in theory, always going to be higher than the revenue number you would be setting in the budget under the status quo without decoupling?
I mean, not necessarily. The way I view it is so today we work to build a budget, and that budget yields a total revenue amount that we need to operate our company. Let's say this past year it was roughly $3.5 billion. When we do a rate case, we don't go and ask council to approve an ordinance that gives us $3.5 billion. We show them the math of why we need the budget that we need. Then we say, will you please approve this price point of an average of 12 cents? Because we think that will deliver us the $3.5 billion that we need. In a future state, if we were to do revenue decoupling and just did the simplest form, instead of asking them to approve 12.5 cents, we'd ask them to approve $3.5 billion. And then we would just figure out, okay, we got to true up that price. We think it's 12 cents, but it might go up a little bit. It might go down a little bit. At the end of the year, we're going to have $3.5 billion. Now, if we do revenue decoupling and we we choose to adjust monthly so that we get to $3.5 billion, yeah, there's some administrative oversight costs that we would incur. And so instead of $3.5 billion, maybe it's 3.5001, like maybe it's an extra few $100,000 to hire some employees to administer the program. But I would think so, but I don't really know.
But while you're speaking, and I think we got one question online here, but while you're speaking on that, the city council, that's all going to have to be, because this all has to be reduced to a rate sheet, okay? That you file, okay? You file a rate sheet, and that all of those movements in and out are going to have to be defined in that rate sheet, I'd guess. I don't know, but I mean, this is all new area for me.
Well, it's new to a lot of us. The answer is yeah. We would have to, and so Shanna spoke to this a little bit. We would have to not only ask them to approve the revenue that we need, the budget, we would also have to ask them to approve the formula that we would use to then true up to get to that revenue. Today, that happens with our fuel and our regulatory adjustments. Every single tariff that we have, there's about half a page of words that governs exactly how we conduct procedures to adjust fuel and regulatory.
Yeah, and that's also the power purchase agreements, not just fuel purchases.
Is that a question?
No, I was just making a statement. I don't ever want people to forget that.
I know.
Okay. Any other questions here? And is there any online? Anakwa, did you have a question? I can't tell by the chat whether you're in.
No.
No, okay. Okay. All right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I have one.
Okay. Okay, go ahead, Dana.
So this decoupling is, if it were done, does it have to apply to all customers, or can you cherry pick customers?
So I want to answer as transparently as I can say. There is nothing in the idea of decoupling that says you can't use it just for portions or certain rate classes. However, you would have to do that in a way that still meets those Texas law requirements of being just and reasonable, not being discriminatory, and recovering about the costs of the class from about the class itself, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Dana, is your question, could you do it with residential and not commercial? Is that your question, or is that an example of your question?
That would be an example.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think that a presentation was sent out to everybody, which basically showed almost all residential customers are not really paying enough to meet the cost of service, and it's made up by the commercial customers.
Yeah, that's in the cost of service study. Yes. We can
Yes,
talk, we can bring that up and talk about that if you want to, and Chad's here to do that. So we can have that discussion. Yes, but that is the case right now. And that was the case in the last two rate studies have shown that. Anything else? Any other questions? Can we go to break? All right, go get your coffee. Thank you. See you in about 15 minutes. than we thought, but all right, the next hour is, let's see. Oh, okay, you take care. Okay, the next hour is for discussions, comments. If folks have speeches, we'll certainly take those. I don't have any problem with it. There's been quite a few folks that have mentioned that when we get to this point on these type of issues, that we haven't been allowing people enough time to talk. We got through the presentations. So what we're going to do is we're going to have open discussion. And if I feel like that it's getting off of the wrong track, then I'll stop it and y'all can all get mad at me. So let's see if anybody wants to talk about anything. If they don't, we can adjourn. Oh, go ahead, Anthony. And please, each one that's here in the room, if you're talking, pick up a microphone so people at home can hear you.
Okay, my question deals with the last presentation of decoupling. It seems to me if CPS were to develop this process, it would somehow take away from the relationship that CPS has, for example, with the city of San Antonio, based on the bond indenture, that we could in effect do increases or do, this whole idea of the rate case. We would never have to go back before city council through board approval of a rate adjustment under the decoupling plan. Now, my concern, if I'm right about that, one of the processes that usually happens is that when CPS does a rate case, it also needs to have some affirmation from members of the city council. If they're not involved in it, I think that might turn into be a rather explosive set of dynamics because they won't have any opportunity for input.
Well, if it's in a rate case, and as we just talked about when Chad was up there, if it's in a rate case, then the city council approves the, again, think about the 3 steps. You get the revenue requirement, you split it between the classes. So if we're talking about, let's just talk about the retail class, and Chad, you correct me if I'm wrong here, but if you talk about the retail class, if there's X number of dollars into that, then we have to have enough revenue coming in to cover those costs. So the city council would have to approve that rate that gave us that based on some assumption on use. And then they would have to set up a series of instructions how we could adjust that rate under some kind of formula. So it's similar to what we do with the pass-through of the adjustments on fuel cost, okay? And every month, I guess they would look at it and see if we followed the rules that the city council approved. That's what I understood Chad saying. Okay, he's shaking his head, yes. Okay. But so it would be complicated, and clearly it would be hard to communicate that to our customers because they would be getting an adjustment on their bill that we wouldn't really understand. And in fact, under our current software, I'm not even sure we could put that in so that they could see it. It would just be in the fuel adjustment with everything else. I don't know. Chad, you want to talk about that? Okay, it'd be, and again, I from the technology standpoint, we can't even break out the fuel adjustment from the step, from the power purchase agreements, from the government charges in the fuel charge. Those are all in one number right now. So if we can't do that, then I don't know how we could add a 5th or 6th item on there that we can't do. Yeah, we will eventually when we get it. But Chad or somebody in the IT can correct me on that.
Yeah, from an execution point of view, like we're not even talking about that yet. We would have to discuss it, and then our good buddies in IT would have to figure out how to actually execute it. But the city council would not lose oversight of our revenue requirements. We would go to them and say, here's our budget, here's our costs, we need X dollars of revenue. Regardless of how we get it, we need X dollars. We think we can get it with this price point, and then we get a part of the way through the year, and maybe we're selling less units than we thought we were going to. And it will lead to less dollars than they approved for us to get. And they would have also approved a formula for us to go and recover the dollars that's the shortfall, or dollars to give back if it's an excess, because it's a hot summer, we'd have excess dollars. So
It's just a different model that most municipal utilities that have to just, we don't make profit, okay? Profit is not a issue here from a rate making standpoint. You know, obviously we're going to see net income on the balance, on the accounting, but from a true rate making case, it's all cost, and you've got to add those costs up. And in fact, for the rate, it's just the part's not in the fuel. It's, you know, the building, the people, the fixed cost. Okay, is that Anthony? Okay, who's next? Let's see if there's somebody online. All right, I have nobody online. Do I have anybody in here? Okay, go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Reed. Chad, I had a question as we're preparing and going into more of this rate design work. Wanted to revisit something we talked about when we were coming into the process. During one of our RAC meetings, Reed and I had asked if you would evaluate the potential restructure of residential and commercial classes as part of the study and contract out the actual study itself, which thank you for moving forward with that and having Brattle as that third party to provide it. So my question is, can you explain how the residential and commercial classes were evaluated, if that in fact was done? And if there's findings or any report about how, or any question, or is that a question we need to ask Brattle? And specifically, we're talking about residential and trying to create what would justify a separate class? And of course, all the other commercial classes. Is that something that we should be preparing for and considering now that we've got the actual cost of service?
So you're talking about finding other commonalities, let me use that word, that would define a class separate from another class inside residential. But we
Yes.
have one that is all electric, okay? That's an older rate. I don't think there's too many people on it, but there is a class within the residential. There's two classes, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, okay? I don't remember. I don't do this stuff. So anyway, but I think we got two classes. So potentially you could have a different class within that. But if you had 5 classes within the residential and he allocates so much to residential versus commercial, you're still going to have to recover it all in that residential section, I would
And
guess.
I think the question was based on that customers were kind of to the decoupling model, which was they were interested in knowing how they were being classed and the costs that they were being charged to recover. And that the commercial had more opportunity to see where they might jump from one commercial class to another. But within the residential, yes, there's a second, but I'll reference the question I asked last month as an example. The low usage solar residential customer as a potential separate class, was that evaluated? And if not, is it something we should be looking at? And then, or should it be a demand cost that would be, or a fixed cost that would be added to that group and they stay within residential, but that helps to recover that cost? That's an example of what I was thinking. I don't know that you can get anything more, because in the cost of service study, it does define how they determine whether they can separate a class. So that's my basis for the question.
yeah, good question. So on the premise that our rates are designed for groups of customers that utilize our system in a similar fashion, is there an opportunity, and did we reevaluate our customer book to potentially resegment to identify pockets of customers that utilize our product differently than others so that we could adjust prices and more appropriately recover costs. I know we did some of that predominantly around solar, but I'd have to go and kind of brush up and talk to them about exactly how much, detail did they dig into. I think you and I at one point had talked about multifamily versus single family. And I can't remember how much detail they got into.
Okay, back to our some earlier discussions. Don't go away. Back to our earlier discussions, we did talk about the fact that the solar customers that had netting meters, okay, they're a different kind of meter. They're a meter that can net as well, go both ways, that they are relying on our fixed cost, okay, and because they're not consistently purchasing power that has the fixed cost in it. Think about it. I mean, every time you buy a kilowatt, you've got some fixed cost that's under the rate, and you've got some variable cost that's the fuel costs and other things, right? So to the extent that they're doing that only when their system's not working or it's inadequate, there's not as much being done there. Now, the question then becomes, is that a separate class, or is that similar to saws, where if you've got a 1/2-inch water meter, you get one fixed charge. If you've got a 3/4 inch, you get a more charge. You've got a 1-inch meter line, you get a bigger charge. Is it that kind of thing where you're adjusting depending on the kind of meter they have, or is it a different class? They're still using electricity the same way, whether you've got solar panels or not, okay? So to set that out as a separate class, I'd have to see somebody tell us how we could do that. Because if you look at how they're using, they're still using power to do their houses like they're. Are they using it in a different manner in that they're not consistently using it? Yeah. So, that's a discussion we can have, sure. I mean, I don't know where CPS comes down on that. We haven't discussed it in a while. Go ahead, Peter.
That's it. Thank you.
All right.
I appreciate the explanation and look forward to seeing how we might consider that going forward.
Okay, that's a good point. We have somebody on? Okay, Anako, you're next.
Yes. Hey, everyone. Just wanted to bring up the conversation around decoupling. Community member Tim Barr wrote in 2021 with the help of the Climate Justice Community a list of recommendations and case studies as well. There is a recommendation and a whole bunch of case studies around rate decoupling. I would love to share those, except I'm not present right now. I was wondering if I could drop some of those links. I think it is really important to read through some of this data, especially that has already been presented.
Okay, and that data was presented by CPS or who?
Tim Barr, he's a community member, professor, I believe.
Well, do you have that? Do you have that
I can drop the
information?
links in the chat for sure.
Yeah,
It's,
well,
case
send it.
studies.
No, send it. Let's don't put it in the chat because the chat goes away. Send it to Ann, and then she'll send the links out to the whole committee. Right, sure.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. All right, who's next? Dr. Cantu, go ahead. Go ahead, Al.
Okay, on this decoupling, I am of the opinion that if my rate's going to go up plus or minus 4%, or minus 2% plus 4%, I'd rather, if I conserve, then I want that savings. And if I use, then I'll pay. And there again, if Andy is conserving, I'm using, and then his bill is going to go up, that's not fair. So I'd like to not socialize that cost. And as far as customer classes, I'd like to see the DER be a separate class, and also the EV have a separate class as well, because they are both of those are different entities. I don't want to have to pay for solar. I don't want to have to pay for electric vehicle charging.
Does anybody from CPS want to grab a hold of that one? I guess not. Let me try then. Okay, so as far as the electric charging, that's something I'd really like to spend some time talking about in the third leg of this triangle, which is managing your demand and time of use billing, okay? If the people come home at night at 5 o'clock and plug their electric car in, then they're going to hit us at a coincident peak problem, okay? If they do it if they have a timer on and they do it at 1 o'clock in the morning, that's actually not causing us as big a problem. So I see that as a time of use charge, which hopefully we'll talk some about in 2 more months. As far as the solar, you know, again, we've got a lot of folks that do have rooftop solar, and they have made an investment, and for a while we were subsidizing that investment, and the federal government is still subsidizing that. So I'd like to hear how people feel about that, because frankly, other than the fact that I think sometimes they might not be paying for the fixed charge that's associated with backup power, maybe, I don't know. Does anybody else want to talk about that? I think I've said all I want to say, because that's all I know. I don't think anybody wants to grab that one either.
I can make a comment on that, Reed, if you like.
Yeah, go ahead. I'd love to have somebody make a comment.
Well, we've talked several times about the solar subsidies. And basically, when the city was subsidizing the local solar rooftops, we had data to show that lowered the bill so far that that particular customer was no longer profitable for CPS. We can't afford to do that. And I think you probably still, I don't know what's happening now, but on the decoupling theory, this is a perfect example of a type of a customer that should be decoupled in order to be able to make that connection profitable, so the rest of the customers aren't paying for that person. I have no problem with somebody putting a solar rooftop. I just don't want to pay for the other guy's bill, which is what we're still doing. So that's that on the solar rooftop. You could take the whole spectrum of customers. Frankly, a decoupling doesn't sound like a bad idea, because we're already underwater, according to the presentation we've been shown, for almost all residential customers aren't really paying enough to make their connection profitable. So, I mean, we should have discussions about, is that the right thing to do? Is that what we want to do? How can we change that to make it equitable for everybody?
Okay. All right, let's hear the discussion. Anybody want to talk?
Reed, there is a CPS program that allows a client to average their cost throughout the year, so that in the summertime, they'll still have the same electric bill as they do in the wintertime. It's just flat across the year. And that program can continue if you want that for budgeting purposes. But that would be to the individual client as it is.
So with that program, that's good. No other questions?
Yeah, go ahead.
With that program on the stable rate per month, but isn't there a time, and I may be wrong on this with CPS, I'm asking, is there, at the end of the year, is there a bill that they would be hit with that brings them up for that year? I just wanted to be sure that if that's correct.
Yes, at the end of the 12 months, there is what we call the true-up period. And based on that threshold, we can redistribute that out. So I believe if there is a $300 or more threshold, what we do is that we enroll that in a 12-month installment plan. So we re-average it, you get a new average monthly bill, and then you pay that past due on top of that.
So is that figured into the following year? In the year
Yes.
it's coming, so their bill will go up, that they continue paying?
Yes.
And it may go up at the end of that following year as well?
Correct. Every 12 months, there's an adjustment,
there would be
and then we
adjustments.
can put the over.
How many customers are on that?
I don't know that number off the top of my head, but we can get that to you.
Okay. One other comment, thank you so much. One other comment I wanted to make, and as Dana was talking, I think it's important to think about the concept of being profitable in different ways, because CPS is not necessarily tasked with being profitable as Valero is, or New Star, et cetera. So when we think of CPS being profitable, it is to carry on their mission.
Well, I think
Rather than the Board of Trustees getting a share of that revenue.
Yeah. Well, I think the word profitable, it's not recovering all cost, okay? That's really what Dana was meaning, is that if we've got money invested in plants and we're expecting that each time we do a kilowatt sale, that we're picking up fixed and variable cost, if there's only a certain amount of time that's being done, are we allowing people to just use our facilities and not totally cover the cost of those facilities, more than it is profit?
So
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring that up
Yeah.
when we think about that word of
right. Yeah.
profitability.
Yeah.
And the other question I had, and I sorry I didn't bring it up before in the presentation, I think it was Deanna or Rick's presentation.
Well, we still have them here, so it's.
Okay, with people on the discount program that do live in a house, is there any type of mandate to get that house weatherized?
We do not have a requirement for weatherization. Sometimes we do face the limitations that they're not up to code. So that's where we maintain that list of customers to do outreach to, get them to apply for it. We try and get customers to enroll in all of our programs all at once. I can't force them to, give them the choice and the control of what they enroll in, but that's definitely the kind of the first targeted outreach that we do for them.
Thank you. And I'll go to the lawyer then. Is there a reason that they could not be required to get into the discount program? And it may be, I just was asking the question, is there into the weather? So if they're going to be in the discount program, then there's a requirement to also enter Casa Verde.
I don't think that there is any legal barriers to that. I think that they would be the same practical obstacles that Deanna referred to before. I'm required to be in the program, but I don't qualify for the program, for instance.
Okay, thank you.
On the profitability.
Let me just follow up on that now just a minute. But as Peter has reminded us, there are new programs through the IRA that will allow funds, if we can properly use them and properly direct them in an efficient manner, to upgrade that electrical system in that house that takes that barrier away. Okay. Go ahead, Al.
On profitability, I think CPS needs to remain profitable per client, and that also translates to lower city taxes.
Well, they need to be sure they recover the cost again,
Mhm.
as a cost recovery entity. We need to make sure that if someone cost us something, we're recovering that from them.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
But
but that's not profit. Not profit in the accounting sense. Now, it's you've really got to keep rate making and the P&L of the entity separate.
In a roundabout way, though, I'd call our city transfer our profit.
Well, that's the return.
Our city transfer.
And that's a return. Yeah, that's the return. And that, again, That's an item in the cost of service, in the revenue requirement.
Yeah, but when a company makes a profit, they return money to their shareholders in a dividend. We return the
Yeah.
money to our owner with a city transfer, which in
But-
a roundabout way is the profit.
But it's not a profit in the sense that if you have an entity like many of us run, where you have revenue and expenses, you might make a profit, you might not. In this case, this is worked into the cost, the rate base, okay?
Well, you might notice in the state
That's you,
legislature.
Dana? Do you need to speak? I'm sorry.
You mind if I have
Go
a
ahead.
further comment
Didn't
talking
see you, I'm
about?
sorry.
It's not necessarily profit. I agree with that. However, the transfer payments are something that's quite substantial and have been noted in recent potential legislation at the state that might prohibit the transfer of revenues in a municipal utility from the utility to the city if that transfer causes a degradation of the bond ratings or is a cause for having to have rate increases. I mean, it sounds to me like CPS, if that law passes, is vulnerable to both of those. Now, the loser would be the city. CPS would actually come out much better on that. I think we should at some level talk about that because it might happen.
Well, right now, we got to figure out what we're going to say about this third step of the rate design as opposed to what's allowed in the cost of service. And that is something that is allowed in the cost of service, which Schwartner is saying he would not allow in the cost of service. So that's a whole different, that's a whole different discussion than what we're doing right now. We got a limited amount of time. We got to come up with something to do on this third step, not decide what's going to be in the cost of service. Okay, what's next? Who's next? Anybody? Okay, Peter.
Quick follow-up on Dr. Cantu. Thank you for bringing up that question about the customer being obligated to also partner with another. And Reed talked about the IRA, but I think the more beneficial would be the demand response component, to add that to reciprocate with that residential homeowner or the customer, because that demand response and the value that it brings to the energy efficiency and the capacity savings is huge across the board. When you look at the reports that STEP puts out, I mean, that's really a benefit. And of course, weatherization component that we've talked about, that's a great impact. But on that STEP program, I wanted to ask this question, Reed, and I had shared this with you, and that the actual fuel adjustment cost is where STEP is paid through. But from what I understand, it's a $70 million a year program right now, and $9 million of that will be recovered through the base rates. And the additional amount will be recovered through the adjustment fuel cost. So I know you talked about that earlier. Can someone speak to that as far as
Chad
how
probably can.
or why that
Probably the labor cost.
$9 million is being allocated or collected through the actual rates? And then Reed, just to remind you of something you shared with me at the very beginning, which was that rate design, that STEP is actually a rate design issue, not so much generation planning. And so kind of in line with that it's tied into the actual rate.
So to your first question around, is there $8 or $9 million recovered in the base rates versus the balance of it is recovered through fuel adjustment? That is correct. My understanding is that that $9 million is sort of an initial program cost that was before we even started STEP. We were doing some work. We had some employees, overhead costs associated with an energy efficiency and conservation program administration, and it just got built into base rates and has stayed in base rates. And so the balance of the cost of STEP ends up going into the fuel adjustment.
So there's no reason to consider that in any different way when we're talking about the rate design, and it's just part of that base rate conversation?
Yeah, I don't see any downsides to it being in base rate versus the fuel adjustment. I mean, sure, I could take it out of base rates and the base rate would go down, but then the fuel adjustment portion of the bill would go up. I guess the only risk would be if we ever spent less than $9 million on STEP in a year, the base rate is going to recover $9 million, and so we would be over recovering. But as a percentage of all of the dollars that we spend on STEP each year, there's very low likelihood that that would happen because we spend more than $9 million a year on STEP.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me look at the screen here. Okay, is this an old request from Anaqua, or is there any new ones? Okay, there's nothing more up here. Anything else here? Anything? Anyone? Going? We're adjourned. Thank you.